exchange. And joining us now to discuss trade and commerce relationships between Australia and South Africa is Graeme Wilson, the Australian High Commissioner to South Africa. Graeme, a moment ago, welcome to you. Nazipa said, did Australia win the first test? I said yes. And she said, substantially? And the answer was yes. So you must be very pleased. What was it, 280 runs, the margin?
It was about that, but I'm not sure it'll be that significant this time around. There's another test match starting tomorrow, and I think in Port Elizabeth, so I imagine it'll be much closer. But it was a dominant performance and an unexpectedly easy win in the end.
I saw a report suggesting that there's a confidence issue here, and that certainly the Australian team has rediscovered the confidence of the Steve Waugh era and that those earlier tough Australian teams. They really seem to have got that aggression back.
I think that's right. Over the last 7 or 8 months, and you started to see some signs of it in England, even though the results there didn't match that. But in Australia, the Ashes series, it was really a very dominant performance and playing very aggressive and, as you say, quite sort of free type of cricket where people were expressing themselves well, and there seemed to be a good sense of teamwork and discipline within the team. That's always very important, I think. In addition to individual performances, you've got to have everyone getting on well and playing for each other, and I think that showed through again in the first test here. It does also help to have a bowler like Mitchell Johnson, who was bowling at the top of his game and looking quite fearsome, and well supported by other bowlers, and our batsmen also did really well after a difficult start.
Graeme, where do you think this sporting rivalry between Australia and South Africa stems from? Why is it such a contentious relationship that we seem to have around sports?
Well, I'm not sure I'd use the word contentious. There is that tremendous rivalry, but in addition, I think Australia and South Africa are probably the two most passionate sporting nations on earth. And I do a lot in support of sport here. I think it's a great way of building teamwork and of creating discipline and actually building bridges between countries, and particularly in South Africa, where once upon a time it may have been a symbol of division. Now it is a way to bring people together. So just in the last year that I have been here as High Commissioner, we've had sports teams coming through at all levels, not just the elite level, in a range of disciplines, women's sports, netball and hockey. We've had rugby league, Australian rules. There's 22,000 players of Australian rules here in South Africa, nearly all of them from the settlement township areas and black South Africans, so that's tremendous. So I think while there is that real rivalry at the elite level, there's also a tremendous level of respect and a great commitment to sport and people who see the value in it. And I think it's one of the things that actually brings us even closer together.
Brings us together and occasionally pushes us apart. As it is, we do like to beat you and we do not like losing to you more than anywhere else. I'm not quite sure why that is, but it is the case. Let's talk about trade relations and investment. My impression, Graeme, is that given these ties historically, part of the old British Commonwealth, part of the new Commonwealth now, the language commonality, the cultural and sporting, perhaps I would have expected a greater Australian commercial presence than we have, or am I misreading that?
No, I think that's a reasonable assessment. I think it's important when you look at the South Africa-Australia relationship, as you indicated. I mean, the historical links are extraordinary. You've got, for example, in the pre-apartheid period, Australia played a leading role internationally. In terms of sporting sanctions and also in terms of financial sanctions. We actually led the world on that, and it was that in the end which sort of broke the back of apartheid. So, and I think there's been recognition of Australia's role along with many other countries in that, and I think more of that will come out this year in the 20th anniversary of democracy. But beyond that, there are these broader ties, as you say, same common language, mixed cultures. Also, we share many of the same challenges. Dry landscapes, water management is a big issue. So there's a lot that brings us together. Obviously, English institutions that we've adapted in our own way. But I think at the broadest level, the relationship is extremely good, and there are many aspects to it. And I'll come to the trade and investment in a minute. But I think just in the last year and this year, just as by way of example, and highlights it was a really good time to be Australia's High Commissioner here, because there is so much happening with Australia on the Security Council last year and this year. That's important because for our relationship with South Africa was on the Council twice in the last 6 or 7 years, so we can draw on its expertise, particularly in relation to the African agenda, which constitutes something like 70% of the work of the UN Security Council. So that's an important sort of broad strategic link that we have. The G20, Australia is president of the G20 this year, and there are meetings going on right throughout the year, culminating in a summit in November, which the President of South Africa and a number of ministers will be attending. That has again a special link with South Africa. South Africa is the only African member of the G20. Australia's also president of the Indian Ocean Rim Association for the next 2 years. And that's a body bringing together some 20 countries with a focus on economic development and maritime security issues, fisheries and so forth in the Indian Ocean. South Africa is a founding member of that and will in due course take over as chair. It'll be Australia, then Indonesia, then South Africa. So on those 3 areas alone, there's tremendous opportunities for more strategic discussions. And Asia Pacific, which is obviously a very big area of importance for us, is increasingly important for South Africa, particularly through the BRICS connection with China and India, another avenue for discussion. But when we get to the sort of purely bilateral issues, I think trade and investment obviously is always up the top. And we have a very, it's all relative I guess, we have a very healthy relationship. Our trade figures suggest that South Africa is by far our most important trading and investment partner in Africa. It represents some 27% of our total trade.
Just pause there and tell us, what do we sell you and what do you sell us?
Well, you sell us a lot of cars. We also get from you a range of other products. You'll be pleased to know that we sometimes eat your Nando chickens as well and your beer. Yeah. But I guess the cars would be by far the major export from South Africa. We sell a lot of ironically, of coal, but thermal coal, particularly used, for example, in BHP's operations, Richards Bay. We also sell some engineering products. We sell wheat. We sell a range of other things. But the trade in terms of both goods and services is around 3.2 billion Australian dollars. Our total trade in Africa is something like $12 billion, so that represents, I say, close to 25-27%. Investment two-way is about $5.2 billion, so roughly 50 billion rand, which again is significant. It could always be more. Yes, significant, obviously, mining services investment in South Africa. But you have a number of companies there, and Woolworths is doing well, owns Country Road. You have Investec. You have a number of other companies that are doing very, very well. Anglo American Coal in Queensland.
Graeme, let me interject there. I mean, you made the indication that we could be doing more, and I understand that the Australian Chamber of Commerce has just recently been set up through this chamber. What other additional things do you think can be done, and how far can the collaboration between South Africa and Australia go on the back of this?
Well, we think it's a very exciting development. What it will do is, I think, add another angle to that already quite strong and vibrant relationship by providing opportunities for businesses. And we're hoping that 150 companies eventually will become members. We already have, we're working towards about 50 now, I think, in a very short period of time. And it's quite an open approach, so you don't have to be Australian companies or even South African companies, but companies that have an interest in Australia. And what it will add, I think, is this opportunity for networking, opportunity for regular meetings, opportunity through newsletters and through a website that's being established, and also opportunities through advocacy in some of the key areas that we operate.
Graeme, we just got a picture up there of you meeting our state president. Was that presenting credentials or signing some kind of trade treaty? I don't know.
Yeah, that was presenting credentials at the end of January, just soon after my arrival last year.
Now, we like to think of ourselves as a kind of gateway to Africa for the Americas, for Australia, for the Pacific. There's a view that we're a bit arrogant about this, and that there are other places that could easily be gateways, like Mauritius, like Kenya. And you're a diplomat, but how do you see us how attractive do you see South Africa in that way of being a potential gateway?
No, I think very much so. Look, South Africa is a very mature market compared to the many others in Africa, and Australians, I think Australian companies feel comfortable coming here because of a similar language, the regulatory environment it also has many similarities, and it has the best infrastructure in Africa. So traditionally, Australian companies have tended to use South Africa indeed as a gateway into the rest of Africa. But as you quite rightly point out, there are always going to be competitors, people wanting to attract investment and offering that same service as a gateway into Africa in this case. So I think it is important to keep working on that, and companies always make decisions based on what they see as the results and the potential, and so that's a constant challenge for any country.
One of the similarities that you touched on earlier, Graeme, between our economies, and it seems as if it extends to our stock exchange, is that we're both very resource heavy. Now, if you were to, again, maybe take off your diplomatic cap and give
You can't.
No,
and give
I'm not well protected under that.
a very, an honest assessment as possible of any concerns around the resources space in South Africa, in particular when we have such mines or labour strife in the mining space. Your views on that and whether that's a key concern for Australia?
Look, I think obviously companies watch these sorts of developments very, very closely, but I was just recently attending Mining Indaba, and if you had been there, you would have seen the extent of the Australian presence. It is quite a dominant presence, and it reflects, I think, the confidence in the sector here in South Africa. I mean, obviously, companies dealing with the rest of Africa have brought in mining ministers from across the continent. In fact, there are more than 25 there, and several hundred Australian companies. And so, I think that highlighted the fact that that there is confidence still. We're going through a difficult period, and that's true not just in South Africa, but in many other countries. But people have faith in the longer-term prospects. But obviously, watching legislation and watching developments closely, but particularly when it comes to the METS companies, I think they see very real opportunities in assisting, and South Africa, as I said, is quite a mature market that people are familiar with, and so that's helpful.
Graeme, another thing that strikes me is that you've got a big country, we've got a big country, yours is bigger, yours is a continent in fact, but it's very dry. Issues around food security down the line, issues about water security, a lot that we can share with each other there, apart from things like the square kilometre array. There are areas for cooperation, but one thinks particularly of things like water.
Indeed, look, I think Australia has a lot of experience and expertise in dryland farming and water management, and it is something we have in the past worked with South Africa on, and we'd be pleased to do more on. But we also, as you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned SKA, because I think that is a very, very exciting project. It's arguably the most interesting, most exciting scientific project in the world. It involves two southern hemisphere countries, South Africa and Australia, where it's co-siting arrangements, and I think it's exciting not just for the astronomical angle to it, and obviously we're going to be discovering lots of things we didn't know about before, but also commercially as well, in terms of technologies that will be required, the engineering skills. So I think down the track, and we're talking about a very long-term project that will be of great interest to South Africa and Australia and other countries as well.